The night air of Miami glittered with luxury. Crystal chandeliers glowed inside the oceanfront mansion, champagne glasses clinked like music, and a string quartet played as if the world belonged only to the rich. Guests in gowns worth more than a family's yearly rent swirled across the marble floor, their laughter shallow, their smiles sharp. This was not just a wedding, it was a performance of power. At the center of it all stood David Turner, the groom. Tall, polished, and radiating arrogance, he basked in the attention like a king on his throne. On his arm was Clara Brooks, his stunning new bride, who wore diamonds as casually as other women wore perfume. They looked like the perfect couple, the ultimate success story. But beneath David's smug smile was something far more cruel. He hadn't just invited friends and investors to witness his triumph. He had invited his ex-wife, Sophia, and he wanted her destroyed. Only a year ago, Sophia had been abandoned, thrown out while pregnant with twins. David stripped her of their home, drained the accounts, and left her to fend for herself. Rumors spread across town that she was broke, living in shame, barely surviving with her newborns. David relished those whispers. To him, humiliation was not enough. Tonight, he wanted her dragged into the spotlight so that everyone could laugh. "She'll come," David bragged to his groomsmen, swirling his champagne with a grin. "She's too proud to hide, and when she does, she'll look pathetic standing next to us. This is the final nail in her coffin." Clara smirked, tightening her diamond bracelet. "I can't wait to see her face when she realizes she doesn't belong here." Guests whispered too, eager for the spectacle. "Will Sophia dare to show up? I heard she can barely feed her children. Imagine her walking in while Clara shines like that." The string quartet swelled as the ceremony prepared to begin. But a quiet tension simmered beneath the glamour. Everyone was waiting for the same thing, the poor ex-wife's humiliation. What none of them knew was that the doors would soon open, and the woman they expected to pity would arrive as the storm that would shatter their perfect illusion. Before the glittering spectacle of David's wedding, before the whispers and the champagne, there was Sophia Turner, the woman who had once believed in fairy tales. Sophia was not born into wealth or privilege. She grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Orlando, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a waitress to keep food on the table. Sophia learned early what sacrifice meant, wearing secondhand clothes, skipping parties to babysit neighbors' kids, saving every dime she could to help her mother pay the bills. She didn't complain. She believed that one day, love would lift her out of hardship. At 22, that hope seemed to come true. She met David Turner at a local charity gala where she volunteered. He was older, confident, ambitious, with the smooth smile of a man who knew how to charm a room. To Sophia, he looked like the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered. He promised stability, comfort, and a home filled with laughter. Against her mother's gentle warnings, Sophia gave him her heart, and soon after, her vows. The early days of their marriage felt like the dream she had chased her whole life. David brought her flowers, held her hand in public, whispered promises of forever. Sophia, with her kind heart, gave everything in return. She left her modest job as a receptionist to support his career, believing that being a devoted wife was her greatest duty. She cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, stayed up late waiting for him when business ran long. To her, love meant sacrifice. But as David's ambitions grew, his warmth vanished. He started staying out late, brushing off her concerns with cold excuses. He mocked her for not being glamorous enough, for not fitting in with his colleagues' wives who wore designer gowns and jewels. Sophia tried harder, learning to cook gourmet meals, stretching their small budget to buy prettier clothes. But nothing was ever enough. Then came the news that should have been a miracle. Sophia was pregnant, not with one child, but twins. She trembled with joy, imagining little feet pattering across the floor, imagining David's proud smile as he held his children. But when she told him, his reaction cut deeper than any knife. "Twins?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You can't even manage yourself, Sophia. How will you manage 2 babies? You're going to ruin my life." The words shattered her. What should have been the happiest moment of her life turned into the beginning of her downfall. David grew colder each day. He stopped coming home, stopped answering calls, started spending money recklessly on things Sophia couldn't understand: luxury watches, exclusive clubs, lavish parties. When her belly grew and her body ached, he didn't comfort her. He sneered. And then, one rainy night, he delivered the final blow. "I'm done," he said flatly, tossing his suitcase at her feet. "Take your things and go. I don't care where. Just don't stay here." Sophia stood in the doorway, pregnant with twins, her tears mixing with the rain. He had taken their house, their savings, their future. All she had left was the beating of two small hearts inside her and the will to survive. From that night forward, her life became a series of battles. She slept on a friend's couch, worked part-time jobs despite her swollen belly, and endured the pitying glances of strangers. When her twins were born, a boy and a girl, she whispered to them through her tears, "I will protect you, no matter what it takes." The world may have labeled her as discarded, ruined, forgotten. But Sophia carried something David could never understand: resilience. And that resilience, sharpened by betrayal and polished by sacrifice, was quietly preparing her for the night when the world would no longer laugh at her, but stand in awe of her. The mansion overlooking Miami's shimmering coastline was transformed into a palace. Golden drapes cascaded down from the ceilings, chandeliers sparkled like constellations, and the scent of roses and lilies filled the air. Outside, a line of luxury cars glittered under the floodlights, each delivering another guest dressed in couture. The press called it the wedding of the year, and for David Turner, that was exactly the point. David stood near the grand staircase, sipping champagne with an air of triumph. His tuxedo was custom-tailored, his hair slicked back with precision, his every movement choreographed to scream success. He wasn't just marrying Clara Brooks tonight, he was cementing his new image. The struggling husband who once lived in modest apartments with Sophia was gone. In his place stood a man who believed he had finally arrived among the elite. Clara floated through the ballroom like a queen. Her wedding gown, dripping with crystals, shimmered with every step. Diamonds sparkled at her ears and wrists, catching the light in blinding flashes. Guests gasped at her beauty, photographers clamored for pictures, and Clara drank in every second. She wasn't just a bride, she was a spectacle. Together they basked in the glow of envy. Politicians clinked glasses with David, investors congratulated him, and socialites whispered that Clara was a perfect upgrade. Every glance, every smile, every shallow compliment added to David's smugness. But beneath the glamour, another current pulsed, one of cruelty. For David, this wasn't just about celebrating love, it was about revenge. He had mailed that invitation to Sophia with a smirk, imagining her walking in wearing some outdated dress, standing awkwardly in the corner while cameras captured her humiliation. He wanted her broken, so he could rise higher. Clara shared his hunger. "Do you think she'll come?" she whispered, her red lips curving into a sly smile. "She can't resist," David replied. "Pride will drag her here, and when she walks in, everyone will see the difference. She'll look pathetic, and we'll look untouchable." Clara's laughter was sharp as crystal. "Then let's make sure she sees every sparkle, every diamond. I want her to feel invisible." They rehearsed it like a performance. Clara dazzling in front of the cameras, David giving his toast, Sophia lurking like a shadow in the background. The thought thrilled them both. For Clara, it was about crushing a rival. For David, it was about erasing his past. As the string orchestra swelled, the ceremony prepared to begin. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of caviar, lobster tails, and champagne that flowed like water. Guests clinked glasses and murmured about business deals, but the whispers always circled back to Sophia. Will she dare to show her face? Imagine how desperate she must be to even come here. She was abandoned with twins, wasn't she? Poor thing. The cruel curiosity of the crowd fed David's pride. He raised his glass and said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Let's toast to new beginnings. Better, brighter beginnings. Tonight, I bury the past for good." The guests laughed and clapped, unaware of the storm waiting just beyond those golden doors. David's empire of arrogance stood tall that night, polished with gold and champagne. He believed he had scripted the perfect play. Sophia as the tragic figure, Clara as the dazzling prize, and himself as the triumphant groom. But what he didn't know was that his stage was about to collapse. The The very humiliation he plotted would soon become the night of his greatest disgrace. To the glittering guests in the mansion, David Turner looked like the perfect groom. Confident, successful, and utterly in love with his radiant bride. But those who had seen him behind closed doors would have told a different story. David's ambition had always been laced with cruelty, and tonight was the crown jewel of his arrogance. When David first met Sophia, he had little more than promises and charm. Her devotion kept him afloat, her sacrifices gave him stability, and her quiet love steadied his reckless dreams. But as soon as his business started turning a profit, he began to see her differently. Not as a partner, but as dead weight. He started pointing out her flaws, little by little. "Why can't you dress like the other wives? You never know the right things to say at parties. You'll hold me back." His words cut deeper than any knife. By the time Sophia carried their twins, his mask slipped completely. "You're ruining my life," he spat one night, slamming the door while she cried alone. Throwing her out wasn't just an act of coldness, it was a calculated decision. In his mind, she was baggage, a reminder of the years when he struggled. He wanted to erase her, to rewrite his story as if she never existed. Enter Clara Brooks. Clara was everything Sophia was not, at least in David's eyes. She was glamorous, ambitious, and well-connected in elite circles. Though her modeling career had never reached the heights she craved, she knew how to dazzle a room. She also knew how to spot opportunity, and David was exactly that. Their relationship was never about love. It was a transaction, an alliance built on vanity and greed. Clara saw in David the wealth and status she wanted. David saw in Clara the glamorous accessory he needed to shine. Together, they fed each other's arrogance. It was Clara who planted the seed of cruelty for the wedding. "Invite her," she whispered one evening as they lounged in their penthouse, sipping champagne. "Let her see what she lost. Let everyone see what you gained." David grinned at the thought. "Imagine her walking in, looking cheap and tired while you glow like this. It'll be perfect." Clara's smile sharpened. "And let's make sure the press notices. I'll tell the photographers exactly where to look. She'll stand there, invisible beside us, like a ghost haunting your success." They rehearsed it in their minds like a stage play. David would raise his glass, thanking the crowd for supporting him when others couldn't. Everyone would know who he meant. Laughter would ripple through the ballroom. Sophia would crumble, and Clara would shine brighter than ever. To David, it wasn't enough to succeed. He needed Sophia's public humiliation to validate his rise. For Clara, it wasn't enough to win. She needed to crush the rival who once had what she wanted. As the night unfolded, they strutted through the ballroom arm in arm, feeding off each other's pride. Guests admired their boldness, though some whispered uneasily. But neither David nor Clara cared. They believed they were untouchable, destined for endless indulgence. What they didn't realize was that the trap they had set was about to snap shut, not on Sophia, but on them. Because the woman they dismissed as weak had transformed into a force they couldn't imagine. And the empire they flaunted was built on sand, waiting for the tide to wash it all away. The grandeur of the wedding wasn't only meant to impress, it was designed as a weapon. Every crystal, every diamond, every flicker of the chandeliers had been carefully orchestrated to send a message. David Turner had won, and Sophia, his ex-wife, had lost. The plan had been whispered into existence months earlier in late-night conversations between David and Clara. While the florists arranged roses and the caterers planned 5-course meals, the couple sat in their penthouse, sipping champagne and plotting cruelty. "Are you sure she'll come?" Clara asked one evening, lounging on a velvet sofa, her manicured nails glittering under the city lights. "She'll come," David said with absolute confidence. "Sophia's pride won't let her stay away. She'll want to see me, to see what she missed. And when she does," he leaned back with a grin, "she'll crumble." Clara smirked. "Good, because when she walks through those doors, I want her to feel like she doesn't belong. Everyone will see her for what she is, a nobody." They rehearsed every detail. David imagined Sophia entering the ballroom in some outdated dress, clutching a purse she bought secondhand. He pictured her standing awkwardly at the back while photographers clamored for shots of him and Clara, radiant in her gown. The unspoken comparison would be brutal. Sophia as the pitiful ex-wife, Clara as the dazzling bride. But Clara wanted more than comparison. She wanted annihilation. "Let's make sure the press gets a shot of her," she said. "I'll tell the photographers where to look. We'll smile for the cameras with her standing right there, like a shadow from your past. The headlines will write themselves." David loved the idea. "And after the vows, I'll make a toast," he added. "Something subtle, but sharp. I'll thank everyone who stood by me when others didn't. Everyone will know who I mean. They'll laugh behind their glasses and she'll break." Even the seating chart reflected their cruelty. David ordered the planner to leave a chair empty near the back, just in case the ex-wife shows up. He instructed the maitre d' to seat her near the most vicious gossips in town, women who would waste no time spreading whispers. Clara ensured her own table was placed in the spotlight, glowing like a queen, while Sophia, if she dared come, would shrink into invisibility. "By the time the night is over," Clara whispered, "no one will even remember her name." David chuckled darkly. "Exactly. Tonight isn't just our wedding, it's her funeral." They believed their trap was perfect. The invitations had been sent with gold trim, deliberately tempting Sophia's pride. Rumors had already been planted, whispers about her poverty, her struggles as a single mother, her loneliness. Guests arrived, expecting to see her at her lowest, eager for the spectacle. But what neither David nor Clara could imagine was that Sophia had changed. The woman they remembered, tired, discarded, and broken, no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had endured sleepless nights, cruel gossip, and endless sacrifice. The trap they built so carefully was still waiting. But the moment Sophia walked through those doors, it wouldn't snap shut on her. It would snap shut on them. The invitation sat on her kitchen table like a cruel joke. The thick cream card, embossed with golden lettering, glittered under the dim light of the tiny apartment. "David Turner and Clara Brooks request the honor of your presence." The words felt like knives pressed against Sophia's chest. For hours she stared at it, her fingers trembling, unable to throw it away, unable to accept it. She knew why he sent it. This wasn't an olive branch or a gesture of civility. It was bait. He wanted her to come, to watch him flaunt his new life while she stood in the shadows. He wanted her humiliation to be public, permanent. The twins slept in their crib nearby, their soft breaths the only comfort in the suffocating silence. Sophia rose and tucked a blanket tighter around them. Their cheeks were round, flushed with innocence, their tiny fists curled in dreams. They were her light in the endless darkness, but they were also the reason the darkness hurt so much. Tears blurred her vision as she sat back down. She remembered the night David had forced her out. 6 months pregnant, clutching her belly, she had begged him not to leave. He hadn't even looked at her. "You'll ruin my future," he said coldly. That sentence had replayed in her mind every night since. Now, here was his future, a lavish wedding with a younger, shinier bride. And he wanted her there to witness it, to prove to the world that she was nothing but a discarded mistake. Sophia buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her body. "Why me?" she whispered into the quiet. "Why do I have to keep fighting?" The loneliness pressed on her like a physical weight. No husband, no family close by, no one to lean on. Just her and the 2 babies who depended on her for everything. Her mind wrestled with the decision. She could ignore the invitation, stay home, protect herself from the pain. But that meant surrender. That meant giving David exactly what he wanted. Her silence, her absence, her invisibility. Or she could go. She could walk into that ballroom, no matter how terrified, and face the people who whispered about her. She could show them she still existed. But in her heart, she feared what they would see. A tired mother in a plain dress, a shadow of the woman she used to be. The clock ticked past midnight. Sophia stood by the window, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. They seemed so far away, like stars she could never reach. She thought of the girl she used to be, the girl who believed in fairy tales, who thought love could save her. That girl was gone. What remained was someone harder, bruised but breathing. As she held the invitation one last time, a new thought began to form. Not a whisper of defeat, but a flicker of defiance. Maybe David expected her to arrive broken. Maybe Clara wanted her to stand in the shadows. But what if she didn't? What if she walked in with her head high, carrying the strength that had kept her alive? She pressed the invitation against her chest and closed her eyes. For them, she whispered, glancing at her sleeping twins. I won't hide anymore. In that moment, Sophia didn't know how she would do it. She didn't know what she would wear, how she would afford to look presentable, or if she could even keep her composure. But the decision was made. She would go. And without knowing it, she had just set the stage for a night that would not break her, but transform her. The morning after Sophia made her decision, she woke with puffy eyes and a heavy heart. The invitation still lay on the kitchen counter, a reminder of the humiliation waiting for her. She moved through her small apartment like a ghost, feeding the twins, folding laundry, pretending life was normal. But inside, dread clawed at her. That was when fate intervened. She heard a knock at the door. Firm, deliberate. Sophia froze, her mind racing. She wasn't expecting anyone. Carefully, she opened it, and there stood a man whose presence seemed to fill the hallway. Jonathan Hayes. Even in a simple navy suit, he carried the weight of authority. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his gaze steady, his posture commanding. People whispered his name with awe, one of the richest men in America, a billionaire investor known for rebuilding collapsing companies and turning them into gold. But what the papers rarely mentioned was the man behind the fortune. Mrs. Turner? His voice was calm, deep, but not cold. Sophia blinked in confusion. Yes? He extended a card. Jonathan Hayes. I know this is unusual, but I believe we need to talk. She hesitated, clutching the doorframe. What business could someone like him possibly have with her? But Jonathan's eyes weren't sharp with judgment. They were steady, almost kind. Against her instincts, she let him in. He looked around the small apartment, at the toys scattered on the floor, at the crib pushed against the wall. His jaw tightened, not in disdain, but in recognition. Finally, he turned back to her. I received an invitation, he said quietly. The same one you did. Sophia's breath caught. The wedding? He nodded. David Turner and Clara Brooks are desperate for attention. Their event is more of a publicity stunt than a celebration, and I know why you were invited. Her face flushed with shame. To humiliate me. Jonathan didn't deny it. Instead, he studied her carefully. I know what it's like. My mother was once in your shoes. She raised me alone after my father walked out to chase a younger woman. She was shamed, whispered about, discarded. But she never gave up. And I swore that one day, if I ever saw another woman put through that same cruelty, I would not stand by. Tears burned Sophia's eyes. She hadn't expected compassion, especially from a man of his stature. But what can I do? She whispered. I'll walk in there and they'll tear me apart. Jonathan leaned forward. Not if you walk in on my arm. She stared at him, stunned. What? Let me help you, he said simply. I have resources, influence, and a reputation that even David Turner can't touch. If you want to face them, don't do it alone. Do it with me. I'll make sure no one ever dares to laugh at you again. Sophia shook her head, overwhelmed. Why me? You don't even know me. Jonathan's expression softened. Because I know your strength. I see it in your eyes. You've survived what most people would collapse under. And those children deserve to see their mother, not as a victim, but as a woman who stood tall. The room was silent except for the twins stirring in their crib. Sophia looked at them, then back at Jonathan. For the first time in months, hope flickered in her chest. Will you let me? He asked gently. Her lips trembled as she nodded. Yes. And with that single word, the balance shifted. Sophia was no longer alone. The game David thought he controlled had just gained a new player. One far more powerful than he ever imagined. The next 48 hours unfolded like a dream Sophia never dared to imagine. After she agreed to Jonathan's offer, the billionaire wasted no time. He summoned a team, stylists, designers, and consultants who seemed to appear out of nowhere, each carrying sleek cases and racks of clothing that glittered like jewels. Sophia watched in disbelief as her cramped apartment turned into a makeshift studio. Rolls of fabric swished across the room, mirrors were set against the walls, and makeup artists laid out brushes like surgeons preparing for an operation. For a moment, Sophia felt like an imposter. She was a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. She wasn't supposed to be here. But Jonathan's voice cut through her doubt. Sophia, this isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about reminding the world who you already are. The stylists worked with quiet efficiency. They measured her, draped silk across her shoulders, and debated colors under their breath. At first, Sophia resisted. "This is too much. I can't afford any of this." Jonathan stepped forward, his tone firm but kind. "You don't have to. Let me handle it. Consider it an investment in you." She swallowed her protest and allowed them to continue. Soon, she was standing on a platform while a seamstress pinned a gown that shimmered like moonlight. The fabric hugged her figure, elegant yet commanding, with a neckline that framed her strength rather than hiding it. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, her breath hitched. For the first time in years, she didn't see a discarded wife. She saw a woman. The transformation didn't stop at the dress. Her hair, once always tied in a hurried bun, was styled into soft waves that cascaded over her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle but powerful, accentuating the fire in her eyes rather than masking it. Every detail whispered of confidence, dignity, and resilience. Meanwhile, Jonathan arranged care for the twins. A nanny, warm and professional, tended to them with gentle hands, dressing them in matching outfits of crisp white and pale blue. Tiny shoes were slipped onto tiny feet, and Sophia's heart swelled as she saw her children looking like the little princes and princess she always believed they were. When everything was ready, Jonathan asked the room to clear. He guided Sophia toward a full-length mirror. "Look," he said softly. Sophia hesitated, then raised her eyes. What she saw made her knees weak. Gone was the weary woman in faded clothes, the mother who cried herself to sleep. Before her stood someone radiant, someone who belonged not in the shadows but in the light. Her voice trembled. "I don't recognize myself." Jonathan shook his head. "You should. This has always been you. David just tried to make you forget." Tears burned in her eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from release, from the dawning realization that she was stronger than she had ever believed. Jonathan extended his hand. "Sophia, tomorrow you will walk into that mansion not as a victim, but as a storm, and no one, not David, not Clara, will ever erase you again." She placed her hand in his. "Steady now. Then let's do it." And in that moment, a plan born of cruelty turned into something else entirely. The stage that David had built for humiliation would soon become the place of Sophia's rebirth. The wedding was already in full swing when whispers rippled through the crowd outside the Miami mansion. Guests who had stepped out to smoke or to pose for photographs near the luxury cars suddenly froze, their eyes lifting to the night sky. A low hum cut through the music and laughter, growing louder until it demanded attention. It wasn't a limousine that arrived. It was a private jet. The sleek silver aircraft descended gracefully onto the manicured lawn beside the estate, its polished body gleaming under the floodlights. Gasps erupted from the guests and phones shot into the air as everyone scrambled to record the scene. "Who on earth is arriving by plane?" one woman exclaimed, clutching her diamond necklace. Inside the ballroom, word spread like wildfire. David, who had been holding Clara's hand for another round of photos, frowned when he saw guests rushing toward the windows. Clara leaned forward, her voice sharp. "What's going on?" The jet door opened and silence fell over the lawn. First, a man stepped out, Jonathan Hayes. His presence alone commanded the crowd, his tailored suit gleaming, his every movement radiating wealth and authority. The murmurs began at once. "That's Hayes, the billionaire. What's he doing here?" But it wasn't Jonathan who made jaws drop. Behind him, a figure appeared at the top of the jet's stairs. Sophia. She descended slowly, the moonlight catching the shimmer of her gown. Each step was measured, graceful, as though she had been born for this entrance. The silk fabric clung to her curves, her hair cascading in waves, her chin held high. In her arms, she carried her daughter, while Jonathan carefully lifted her son and held him close. The twins, dressed in white and pale blue, looked like cherubs, their innocence shining against the glittering backdrop. The crowd erupted in disbelief. "Is that Sophia Turner? She looks incredible." "No, it can't be." Sophia didn't flinch. For the first time in months, she didn't feel small. With Jonathan by her side and her children in her arms, she walked across the red carpet that had been hastily rolled out for them. Paparazzi lights exploded like fireworks, and every camera lens turned away from the bride inside the mansion to the woman who had just arrived like royalty. Inside, David's face drained of color. He gripped his glass so tightly it cracked. Clara, frozen in her gown of crystals, could barely speak. This wasn't supposed to happen," she hissed. David tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle. "It's a stunt," he muttered. "She's desperate for attention." Yet his eyes betrayed him. Fear, confusion, and a dawning realization that the trap he had set was collapsing before the ceremony had even begun. The doors of the mansion swung open as Sophia entered. Conversations died instantly. Heads turned. The music faltered. Every pair of eyes in the ballroom locked onto her, the woman who had been invited to be ridiculed, but instead arrived like a queen. Jonathan placed a steadying hand on her back. She held her head higher, her steps echoing against the marble floor. The twins gurgled softly, their innocence softening the tension. For the first time, Sophia felt the weight of power shift, not toward David, not toward Clara, but toward herself. And as she walked past the stunned guests, the whispers began again. But this time, they weren't mocking, they were awed. "She's breathtaking. She's stronger than ever. She just stole the entire night." David clenched his fists at the altar, his perfect wedding unraveling before his eyes. The ballroom, once buzzing with laughter and champagne-fueled chatter, fell into a hush so thick it was almost suffocating. All eyes turned to the grand entrance where Sophia stood, framed by the golden doors of the mansion. The chandeliers above glittered down upon her like a spotlight, as if the entire universe had chosen this moment to crown her. The music faltered. The violinist dropped a note before quickly recovering, but it was too late. Nothing could pull attention away from Sophia. She looked radiant, her gown shimmering with every movement, her face calm yet resolute. In her arms, her daughter rested peacefully, while Jonathan Hayes carried her son with the ease of a man who had claimed a family as his own. Gasps echoed through the room. One woman whispered to her friend, "That's Sophia, the ex-wife? She looks magnificent." Another guest murmured, "And with Hayes? My God, she's standing next to one of the most powerful men alive." The whispers spread like wildfire. Awe, confusion, envy. Cameras flashed. Even the most jaded socialites leaned forward, unable to deny the raw power of her entrance. Clara's perfect smile cracked as she clutched David's arm with nails that dug into his sleeve. "Why is she here? And why with him?" Her voice was a hiss, sharp enough to slice glass. David's jaw clenched. His eyes burned with rage as he tried to steady himself. This was not the script he had written. Sophia was supposed to be small, invisible, broken. Instead, she was the storm stealing every ounce of oxygen in the room. He forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. "She thinks this little show will change anything? She's still nothing. Just wait, they'll see." But even as he spoke, his confidence wavered. He saw the way the guests looked at her, not with pity, but with respect. The same investors he had spent years flattering now turned their attention toward Jonathan, who walked beside Sophia with effortless authority. Every step she took seemed to strip away David's illusion of power. The officiant, flustered, tried to regain control of the ceremony, but no one listened. All eyes were locked on Sophia as she and Jonathan glided further into the room, her chin lifted high, her every movement deliberate. At that moment, David's fury boiled over. He slammed his champagne glass onto a nearby table, shards scattering across the floor. The sharp crack silenced even the whispers. Guests turned to him, startled by the sudden display. Clara's eyes widened. "David, stop! You're making a scene." But the damage was done. His outburst only emphasized the contrast. David unraveling in his own wedding, and Sophia, composed, glowing with unshakable strength. Sophia met his gaze across the room. For a brief, piercing moment, it was just the two of them, the man who had discarded her and the woman he thought would never rise again. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was louder than any accusation. David looked away first. The guests noticed. They always noticed. And in that instant, the balance of power shifted irreversibly. Jonathan leaned down, his voice calm but carrying through the air. "Shall we take our seats, Sophia?" She nodded, her smile small but victorious. Together, they moved toward the front of the room, leaving a trail of stunned silence behind them. David gripped the edge of the altar, his knuckles white. His perfect night was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The officiant's voice tried to rise above the murmurs, but the ceremony had already lost its rhythm. The grand ballroom no longer revolved around the bride and groom. Every gaze lingered on Sophia, seated gracefully with Jonathan beside her and her twins cooing softly in their laps. It was a tableau of serenity, and it burned David alive. Unable to bear the shift in attention, he stepped forward, his smile stretched too tightly across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising his voice as though he were reclaiming control of the room. "It seems we have unexpected guests tonight." The guests tittered nervously, sensing the tension but unwilling to look away. David's eyes locked on Sophia, sharp and venomous. "Welcome, Sophia. I see you've dressed up for the occasion. I didn't realize you still had the energy after. What was it? Struggling to raise 2 children on your own?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara smirked, pleased with his cruelty. To them, this was the moment Sophia would shrink, humiliated before everyone. But Sophia didn't flinch, her chin lifted higher, her eyes unyielding. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Jonathan spoke for her. Interesting. Jonathan's voice rang out, calm yet commanding, cutting through the whispers like a blade. "Because from where I stand, I don't see struggle. I see strength. I see a mother who has raised 2 beautiful children despite the odds, and now she does not walk alone." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between David and Jonathan. A billionaire's words carried weight, more than David had ever managed to wield. David scoffed, trying to recover. "Oh, please, don't tell me you've fallen for her little act. She's just a—" Jonathan's hand rose, silencing him without force, just presence. "Careful, Turner. Every word you say tonight is being watched, recorded, remembered. This isn't your private living room where you can throw away people like garbage. This is a room full of witnesses, and they're watching you unravel." The words struck like thunder. Guests nodded subtly, some even whispering agreement. David's face flushed red. Clara tugged at his sleeve, hissing, "David, stop. You're making it worse." Sophia remained poised, her hand resting gently on her daughter's back. Inside, her heart raced, but she refused to let David see it. For years, she had endured his insults in silence. Now she realized the silence was no longer hers to carry. Jonathan had given her a shield, and the weight lifted from her shoulders felt almost surreal. One older guest, a board member David had been courting for months, leaned toward another and muttered, "If Hayes is with her, Turner's finished." The murmurs grew louder. The trap David had set to humiliate Sophia was snapping shut, but on him. His attempt to paint her as pathetic had only highlighted her grace and his bitterness. Desperate, he forced a laugh. "Fine, enjoy your moment, Sophia, but let's not forget who left who. I built this life. You had nothing." Sophia finally spoke, her voice calm but ringing clear across the ballroom. "And yet, David, with all your wealth and all your cruelty, you still can't take from me the one thing that matters." She looked down at her twins, then back up with fire in her eyes. "Dignity." The room erupted. Some gasped, others clapped softly, as if unable to contain themselves. David's mask cracked completely. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, his wedding night slipping further from control. And the more he fought, the more the world saw not a groom in triumph, but a man drowning in his own venom. The ballroom was no longer a wedding, it was a theater, and every guest sat spellbound, waiting for the next act to unfold. David's face burned crimson, his arrogance unraveling thread by thread. Clara's crystal-covered gown glittered under the chandeliers, but she looked pale, her grip on David's arm trembling. Sophia remained calm, seated with Jonathan beside her and the twins in her arms. The whispers around the room grew louder. People leaned in, hungry for the truth behind her sudden, dazzling return. David tried to seize control again. He stepped forward, raising his voice. "Let's not forget why we're here tonight. This is my wedding, not a circus for an uninvited guest and her baggage." He waved his hand dismissively toward the twins, his voice dripping with venom. The cruelty sliced through the air. A few guests gasped. Others shifted uncomfortably. Even among the elite, there were lines one didn't cross, and insulting children was one of them. Sophia rose slowly, her gown flowing around her like a river of light. She held her daughter close, her son resting peacefully in Jonathan's arms. Her voice was steady, clear, carrying across the ballroom without effort. "Baggage," she repeated softly, but with steel beneath the word. "These children are not baggage, David. They are your children." The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, and shocked cries ricocheted off the marble walls. "His children?" one woman hissed. "But he never said." "Twins? My God, they're his?" The ripple of scandal swept across the ballroom like wildfire. David's face froze, his smugness replaced with panic. "That's a lie," he snapped. "You can't prove anything." Sophia's gaze cut through him like glass. "You know it's the truth. You threw me out when I was carrying them. You left me alone to give birth while you paraded around with Clara, and now you dare to call them baggage?" Her words cracked open the silence, filling the room with the raw weight of betrayal. Guests turned to one another, murmuring, their respect for David evaporating with every second. Jonathan stood then, still holding the boy, his stature commanding the room. "I have seen the documents," he said firmly. "Birth certificates, hospital records. There is no doubt. These are David Turner's children. And yet, he abandoned them." The murmurs grew into outrage. A man at the front shook his head in disgust. "He abandoned his own blood?" A woman near the back whispered, "And she raised them alone. How did she survive?" Clara stumbled back a step, her eyes wide. "David, you told me." David hissed at her under his breath, but the damage was already done. The image he had so carefully crafted, successful, powerful, untouchable, was crumbling in front of the very people he had wanted to impress. Sophia held her head high, her voice unwavering. "I may have been poor. I may have been broken, but I was never alone. I had them, and they gave me the strength to keep going when you tried to erase me." Applause broke out, not loud, not yet, but soft, steady, growing from one corner of the room. Guests who had once sneered at her now nodded with respect. The tide had turned completely. David's chest heaved with fury. "You think this changes anything?" he roared. "You're still nothing without me." Jonathan's reply was sharp as steel. "No, Turner, you're nothing without them, and tonight, everyone sees it." The ballroom held its breath, the weight of truth crushing David's empire of lies. The revelation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. David's fury radiated across the ballroom, but no amount of shouting could drown out the whispers now spiraling through the crowd. Every guest, politician, investor, socialite, was buzzing with scandal. "His children?" a senator muttered, his face twisted in disgust. "And he abandoned them?" An heiress shook her head, clutching her pearls. "Unbelievable, to think I once praised his integrity." David's empire was built on perception, on charm, deals sealed with handshakes, and the illusion of stability. That illusion shattered in seconds. Investors who had flown in for his wedding now eyed him with suspicion, murmuring among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, firing off messages to business partners. Stockholders didn't wait for explanations. They smelled rot in the air, and no one wanted to sync with him. Jonathan Hayes, standing tall beside Sophia, understood the power of silence. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He simply held her son, calm and collected while the storm consumed David. That quiet dignity only amplified Sophia's strength. Clara, her face pale beneath layers of makeup, stepped back from David. The perfect bride began to crack. "David, you lied to me," she hissed. "You said you didn't have children." "Clara, this isn't—" David tried, but she yanked her hand from his grip. "Don't touch me." Her voice rang out, sharp and panicked. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. I won't be a fool." Gasps rippled as she turned away, her train dragging across the marble floor. The bride was abandoning the groom before the vows were even finished. Photographers swarmed, flashes bursting like fireworks. "This is history," a journalist whispered to his colleague. The wedding of the year just became the scandal of the decade. David tried to salvage the moment, raising his hands desperately. "Listen, everyone, she's lying. Sophia's just bitter, trying to ruin my happiness. You all know me. You know I'm a man of honor." But the room answered with silence. Not a single clap, not a single nod of agreement. Instead, guests turned their backs. Some whispered curses under their breath. Others walked out, their heels clicking against marble as if hammering nails into his coffin. One of his key investors, Mr. Langford, stepped forward. "Honor?" he sneered. "You let your wife raise your children alone while you threw money at a mistress? That's not honor, Turner. That's disgrace." He dropped his champagne glass into a nearby bucket with a deliberate crash before storming out. One by one, others followed. Each exit was another crack in David's crumbling empire. Clara's friends circled her, consoling the runaway bride as if she were the true victim. No one defended David. Not one. Sophia stood quietly, her daughter resting peacefully on her shoulder. She didn't gloat, didn't shout. She let the truth speak for itself, and the truth was more powerful than any revenge she could have scripted. David's voice broke as he screamed after the departing crowd. "You'll regret this. I made all of you rich. You can't turn on me." But they already had. Jonathan's deep voice cut through the chaos, calm yet final. "The only one who should regret anything, Turner, is you." Every camera in the room captured the image. David trembling, abandoned, a groom without a bride, a man stripped bare in front of the world. And beside him, Sophia, serene, untouchable, radiant with the dignity he could never destroy. The public backlash wasn't waiting outside the doors. It had already begun. Here and now. The ballroom was chaos, guests leaving in waves, whispers spiraling like smoke, and cameras flashing without pause. But amid the storm, Clara Brooks stood frozen, her glittering gown suddenly feeling like chains wrapped around her body. She had entered this marriage with visions of wealth, influence, and prestige. David Turner was supposed to be her ticket into the elite, her guarantee of power. But now, in front of hundreds of witnesses, she realized she wasn't marrying a king. She was tethering herself to a sinking ship. Her chest tightened as she replayed Sophia's words in her mind. "These children are your children." The twins' resemblance to David was undeniable. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing eyes. How had she been so blind? Or perhaps deep down she had always known. The whispers around her were merciless. Poor Clara, tricked into marrying a liar. Imagine being blindsided like that. She deserves better than a man who abandons his own kids. Clara's perfect smile cracked completely. Her hands trembled as she pulled away from David. He grabbed her wrist in panic. "Don't you dare embarrass me," he hissed. "Not now. Not in front of them." Her eyes flashed. "Embarrass you? You humiliated me the moment you hid those children. You made me look like a fool." The guests gasped. The microphones of reporters caught every word. Clara's voice rang out, clear and sharp as crystal. "You lied to me, David. You lied about everything. You told me she was nothing but a bitter ex-wife, that she was weak, pathetic. And yet here she stands, stronger than I'll ever be, while you unravel like a coward." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes bore into David, his face pale and twitching with rage. Clara ripped the diamond ring from her finger, the one he had given her with such arrogance, and tossed it onto the floor. It clinked against the marble, the sound echoing like a gavel delivering a sentence. "I won't be chained to a man who abandons his children," she declared. "I won't marry you, David Turner." The ballroom erupted in murmurs and applause. Some guests even stood, nodding in approval, as if Clara's rebellion was the final confirmation of David's downfall. David lunged forward, desperate to stop her, but Jonathan stepped smoothly between them, his broad frame a barrier of authority. "Enough," Jonathan said coldly. "She's made her choice. Let her go." Clara met Sophia's gaze across the room. For the first time, her eyes softened, not with kindness, but with acknowledgement. A silent message passed between them. "You won." With that, Clara lifted her chin, gathered the train of her gown, and strode out of the ballroom. Reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing like lightning. She didn't look back. David stood trembling, abandoned by the very woman he thought would secure his place among the powerful. His bride had walked away, his guests were fleeing, and his empire of lies crumbled around him. Sophia remained seated, calm and unshaken, her children nestled close. She didn't need to gloat. The truth had spoken louder than vengeance ever could. For David Turner, the wedding that was meant to humiliate his ex-wife had become his own public execution. And the knife had been twisted not just by Sophia, but by the bride who left him standing alone. The ballroom had already turned into a stage of disgrace, but no one expected the final curtain to fall so swiftly. Just as Clara disappeared through the golden doors, abandoning the groom she once flaunted, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. Uniformed officers stepped inside, 3 men and 1 woman, their presence slicing through the luxury like a blade. Their polished shoes echoed against the marble, the sound colder than any violin. Guests froze mid-sentence, glasses of champagne halfway to their lips. The string quartet stopped altogether. David's eyes widened, his bravado faltering. "What is this?" he barked, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. "Some kind of mistake? This is my wedding, for God's sake." The lead officer, a stern man with a hard jawline, raised a folder. "David Turner, we have a warrant for your arrest." The words thundered through the room. Gasps filled the air, followed by frantic whispers. Arrest? On his wedding day? David staggered back, his face pale. Arrest? For what? This is insane. Do you know who I am? The officer's gaze didn't waver. You are being charged with fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. We have evidence of falsified financial statements, offshore accounts, and illegal transfers connected to your company. You are coming with us. The crowd erupted in shock. Investors clutched their phones, hastily texting partners. Some guests shook their heads, muttering curses under their breath. I knew it, one man hissed. Too good to be true. David spun wildly, searching for support. This is a setup. She did this. He pointed at Sophia, his finger trembling with rage. She's behind this, she and that billionaire. Jonathan Hayes rose calmly, his posture unshaken. Don't flatter yourself, Turner. The law doesn't move at my command. Your crimes caught up with you all on their own. Sophia remained silent, holding her daughter close. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed serene. For years she had endured his cruelty without power. Tonight she didn't need to lift a finger. Justice had arrived on its own. David lunged toward Jonathan, his voice breaking. You ruined me. You took everything. Jonathan didn't flinch. His tone was sharp, final. No, Turner. You ruined yourself. You abandoned your family. You gambled away your dignity. And now you've gambled away your freedom. The officers seized David's arms, snapping handcuffs around his wrists with a metallic click that rang through the ballroom. Guests gasped, some even pulling out their phones to capture the moment. The man who once strutted with arrogance now stood shackled, sweat beading on his forehead. Clara's voice rang from the doorway, sharp and cutting. Good luck explaining this to the tabloids, David. You wanted a spectacle? You got one. She turned and vanished, leaving him to choke on her words. The officers began leading him out, but David fought, thrashing against their grip. No, you can't do this. I built this empire. I made you all rich. You'll regret turning on me. But the ballroom answered with silence. No one defended him. No one moved to stop the authorities. His empire had collapsed in a single night, and all that remained was the hollow echo of his downfall. Sophia exhaled slowly, tears brimming in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. She looked down at her children, whispering softly, "It's over." And as David was dragged through the golden doors, cuffed and broken, the guests turned their gaze back to Sophia. For the first time she wasn't seen as a victim. She was seen as a woman who had endured, who had risen, who had reclaimed her dignity in the very place he tried to destroy it. The ballroom, once filled with chaos and scandal, grew eerily quiet after David was dragged away in handcuffs. The echo of the doors slamming shut seemed to seal not just his fate, but an entire chapter of Sophia's life. For a moment, time stood still. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some staring in awe at the woman who had just outshone the richest diamonds in the room without even trying. Sophia sank back into her chair, her twins nestled close. Her son reached for her necklace, tugging playfully, while her daughter pressed a tiny hand against her cheek. The innocence of their touch undid the dam she had held back for years. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop herself, tears spilled down her face. But these were not tears of humiliation. They were not the desperate sobs of a woman abandoned in the rain or the silent cries of a mother rocking her babies to sleep in a lonely apartment. These tears were different. Tears of release, of victory, of a soul finally unburdened. Guests watched, stunned by the rawness of the moment. Some dabbed their own eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected beauty of seeing strength and vulnerability intertwine. Jonathan leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Sophia, you don't have to hold it in anymore. Not here. Not tonight." She shook her head, her lips trembling. "I thought I'd never be free of him. Every day I carried his words, his cruelty, like chains around my neck. And now—" She looked toward the doors where David had been taken. "Now those chains are gone." Her tears fell onto her daughter's tiny hand. The little girl giggled, unaware of the storm that had passed. Sophia laughed softly through her tears, a sound that carried both fragility and triumph. The applause began softly, from one guest, then another. Soon the entire ballroom joined in, clapping not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for her. For the woman who had endured abandonment, poverty, gossip, and humiliation, yet still stood tall with dignity intact. Sophia pressed her forehead against her son's hair, inhaling the sweet scent of baby shampoo. "I did it for you," she whispered. "I survived for you." Jonathan placed a reassuring hand over hers. His eyes glistened, though his composure remained steady. No, Sophia. You survived because you are stronger than anyone gave you credit for. You saved yourself first, and that is why you can save them too. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to believe she was not alone. The moment stretched, fragile and luminous. Around them, the grandeur of the ballroom seemed to fade. No chandeliers, no crystal glasses, no whispers of the wealthy mattered anymore. What mattered was the quiet victory of a mother who had fought the hardest battles in silence and had finally won. Sophia wiped her cheeks and lifted her chin. The tears were gone, replaced by a new light in her eyes. Resolve. She would not just survive anymore. She would build, she would rise, and she would show her children that dignity and love could conquer even the darkest cruelty. The night that was meant to humiliate her had instead become her coronation. And as the applause swelled, Sophia realized something she had never dared to believe. She was no longer defined by what David had taken from her, but by what she had reclaimed for herself. The applause in the ballroom eventually softened, leaving behind a hum of admiration and reverence that lingered in the air. Sophia dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, trying to steady her breath. She had faced storms and survived, but nothing could have prepared her for the silence that followed, the silence of being truly seen. Jonathan Hayes stood beside her, one arm still cradling her son as though he were his own flesh and blood. His presence was steady, grounding her in the middle of the whirlwind. When the last claps faded, he turned to her, his expression solemn yet tender. "May I?" he asked softly, gesturing toward the center of the room. Sophia blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" Jonathan extended his free hand. "Walk with me." "Just a moment." Hesitant, she placed her daughter in the arms of the nanny Jonathan had arranged earlier, then slipped her hand into his. Together they stepped forward, the crowd parting instinctively, as though recognizing that something important, something beyond spectacle, was about to happen. Jonathan stopped beneath the chandelier, its golden light casting a halo over them. He handed Sophia's son gently to the nanny, then turned fully to her, his gaze piercing yet warm, locked with hers. "Sophia," he began, his voice deep but unshaking, "I've spent my life building empires. I've negotiated with kings, billionaires, and governments, but never, not once, have I stood in a room and felt as humbled as I do tonight." Her breath caught. "Jonathan." He raised a hand, silencing her gently. "I watched you walk in here with grace after everything you've endured. I saw the strength in your eyes, the dignity you carry even when the world tried to strip it away. And I knew something with absolute certainty. I cannot let this moment pass without telling you the truth." Sophia's heart pounded. The room was silent, every guest hanging on his words. "I don't just admire you," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "I care for you. I want to stand beside you, not just tonight, not just in this fight, but for as long as you'll let me. I want to protect you, support you, and give those children the life they deserve. Not as charity, not as pity, but because I believe in you, Sophia. And because his voice softened, almost breaking, because I've fallen in love with you." Gasps swept through the room. The same society that once came to witness her humiliation now stood witness to something entirely different. A declaration of love that was as raw as it was powerful. Sophia's knees threatened to buckle. Tears welled again, but this time they carried no sorrow. "Jonathan, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he interrupted gently, "but I want to. I choose you, Sophia, you and your children. If you'll have me, I will devote everything I am to making sure you never stand alone again." The ballroom seemed to fade until it was only them, two souls who had both known loss, now daring to imagine healing together. Sophia's lips trembled. For so long she had built walls to protect herself from more pain, but looking into Jonathan's steady gaze, she felt those walls crumble, not from weakness, but from finally feeling safe enough to let them fall. Her whisper was barely audible, yet it carried louder than a shout. "Yes." And the room erupted, not in scandal but in thunderous applause. The ballroom, which only an hour ago had been charged with scandal and venom, now pulsed with something entirely different: hope. The applause following Jonathan's confession had not died down quickly. Instead it swelled, rolling like waves across the room. Guests who once came for gossip now found themselves caught in something greater, something unforgettable. Jonathan took Sophia's hand, bowing slightly, his voice rich and steady. "May I have this dance?" Her heart skipped. For a moment the old fear tugged at her. Fear of judgment, fear of stepping into the spotlight again. But when she looked at her twins, giggling in the nanny's arms, and then back into Jonathan's unwavering gaze, she realized this was not about fear anymore. It was about freedom. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying like a vow. The string quartet, sensing the moment, began to play. It wasn't the stiff, traditional march they had prepared for David and Clara. Instead, the notes of a tender, soaring melody filled the air, wrapping the room in warmth. Jonathan led her to the center of the marble floor. The chandeliers cast a golden glow, turning the ballroom into a dream. He placed one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers, steady and sure. Sophia lifted her chin, her gown flowing like water as she stepped into the rhythm. At first, her movements were hesitant, the weight of years of pain still clinging to her limbs. But Jonathan guided her gently, his confidence lending her strength. Step by step, the fear melted away. Her body remembered joy, remembered grace, remembered that she was more than the pain she had carried. Gasps echoed as the pair glided across the floor. Guests leaned forward, captivated. Some even began to cheer softly, their applause punctuating the music. The woman who was supposed to enter the night as a victim was now reborn as a queen before their very eyes. Sophia laughed, a sound so pure it startled even her. It wasn't the hollow laugh she once used to mask pain. It was real, bubbling up from a place she thought had long died. Jonathan smiled back, his eyes crinkling at the corners, as if her joy was the only thing he wanted in the world. When the music swelled, he spun her gracefully. Her gown shimmered, her hair caught the light, and in that moment, every scar of the past seemed to burn away. She wasn't the abandoned wife anymore. She was a woman who had survived betrayal, who had walked through fire, and who had emerged radiant. The twins clapped their tiny hands from the sidelines, their laughter ringing like bells. Guests melted at the sight, some wiping tears. It was no longer just a dance, it was a declaration. A declaration that love, dignity, and resilience could outshine cruelty and greed. As the final note faded, Jonathan drew her close, whispering for her alone. "This isn't just a dance, Sophia. It's the beginning of everything new." She leaned into him, breathless, her heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in years, hope, fierce and alive. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Some guests even stood, cheering as if they had witnessed history, and in a way, they had. The night that was meant to break Sophia had become her coronation, her rebirth, her triumph. And with Jonathan's hand in hers and her children watching, she knew this was only the beginning. Outside the glittering mansion, the night air crackled with chaos. David Turner, once paraded as the image of success, was shoved into the back of a police car, his wrists bound in steel. Paparazzi swarmed like vultures, their cameras flashing relentlessly, capturing every angle of his fall. "David, is it true you abandoned your children?" "Turner, are you guilty of fraud?" "Where's your bride? Did she leave you?" The questions pummeled him like stones. He tried to shield his face, but every photograph told the story of a man undone, his tuxedo disheveled, his expression wild, his arrogance gone. By morning, the headlines spread like wildfire. From groom to criminal, David Turner arrested at his own wedding. The billionaire ally and the abandoned wife. How Sophia stole the spotlight. Clara Brooks walks out. Bride leaves groom in scandal. Every paper, every news site, every whisper in high society carried his disgrace. Investors cut ties overnight, pulling millions from his collapsing company. Politicians who once toasted with him publicly denounced him. "We had no idea of his misconduct," they claimed, though many had ignored the signs. The television networks replayed the footage on endless loops. David shouting in desperation, Sophia's calm declaration about her twins, Clara's dramatic exit. Clips of Jonathan Hayes defending Sophia went viral, hailed as the epitome of honor. The internet crowned Sophia a symbol of resilience. David, meanwhile, became a meme. His furious face, twisted in humiliation, was plastered with captions, "When you realize your ex-wife outshines you at your own wedding." Another read, "David Turner, from tuxedo to taxpayer-funded jumpsuit." In prison, the reality of his downfall settled in. Gone were the tailored suits, The private jets, the crowds who once applauded his every move. He was just another inmate, stripped of his name, his wealth, his pride. The same hands that once signed million-dollar deals now clutched a metal food tray. The same voice that once commanded boardrooms now shouted into the void of a cell block, unheard and unimportant. Clara refused all contact, filing for annulment before the ink on the police report had dried. Investors filed lawsuits, clawing back every cent he had stolen. Even former friends testified against him, eager to protect themselves. And perhaps worst of all, David was forgotten, not with silence, but with mockery. High society laughed at his name, telling his story as a cautionary tale at cocktail parties. The man who once craved attention became the punchline of every joke. Inside his cell, David replayed that night again and again. He remembered the way Sophia had looked at him, calm, unbroken, radiant. The image haunted him, a reminder of everything he had tried to erase but couldn't. For the first time, he realized he hadn't just lost his wealth or his bride. He had lost the war he had waged against her dignity. And that loss was permanent. Back in Miami, Sophia's story became legend. She wasn't just the woman David abandoned, she was the woman who rose above him. She was no longer whispered about in pity, but celebrated in admiration. And every headline, every cheer for her, was another nail in the coffin of David Turner's legacy. The world had watched him build an empire of arrogance. Now, the world watched it crumble into dust. And David Turner, once obsessed with proving his power, was left with nothing but the bitter truth. He had destroyed himself. The weeks after David's downfall unfolded like the slow opening of a long-locked door. For Sophia, each day felt lighter, as though the shadows that once haunted her had finally receded. The newspapers no longer called her the abandoned wife. Now they wrote of her strength, her dignity, her resilience. But Sophia did not bask in fame. Her heart was with her twins, who were finally free from the cloud of shame their father had cast. Each morning she woke to their laughter, their tiny hands reaching for her face, their innocence a reminder of why she had endured everything. Jonathan was never far. He visited often, not as a savior, but as a partner, someone who walked beside her, steady and unwavering. He insisted that she and the twins move into one of his estates, a home with wide gardens where the children could run freely, a place filled with warmth instead of fear. At first, Sophia hesitated, afraid of depending on another man. But Jonathan's words lingered. Not pity. Choice. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe him. One afternoon, standing in the garden while her twins chased butterflies, Jonathan approached. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should build something together. Not for me, not even for us, but for women like you. Women who've been silenced, shamed, or abandoned. They deserve the same chance you fought for." Sophia's eyes widened, her heart swelling. "A foundation?" He nodded. "A place where single mothers can find support, resources, and dignity. Let's give them what no one gave you." Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they carried hope. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's do it." News of the foundation spread quickly. Donations poured in, not because of Jonathan's fortune, but because of Sophia's story. Women from every corner of the country wrote letters, thanking her for giving them courage. She read each one, her heart aching and healing with every word. On the day of the foundation's opening, Sophia stood at the podium with Jonathan by her side and her twins in the front row. Cameras flashed, but she no longer feared them. She lifted her chin, her voice strong, her words echoing across the hall. "I was once told I would never matter," she began, "that I was nothing without the man who left me. But I stand here today to tell every woman, you are not defined by who walks away. You are defined by your strength, your love, your refusal to give up. If I could survive, so can you. And together we can build something better." The audience rose in thunderous applause, some with tears streaming down their faces. Sophia looked down at her children, who clapped their tiny hands with glee, unaware of the history their mother was making. She smiled through her tears, feeling a peace she had thought she would never know. Jonathan leaned in, whispering softly, "You've given them hope, and you've given me something I never thought I'd find again, family." Sophia turned to him, her eyes shining. For once, the future didn't frighten her. It called to her, bright and boundless. The story that began with betrayal ended not in despair, but in triumph. The woman who was meant to be humiliated had become a symbol of strength, justice, and rebirth. And as the applause rose again, Sophia whispered to herself a promise, not just for her, not just for her children, but for every woman who had ever been told she was less. Never again, she vowed. Never again will I let anyone take my dignity. It wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of everything new. So that's how the story ends. But you know what? If you're still here with me right now, it means something about Sophia's journey touched you. Maybe in ways you didn't even expect. And honestly, that says a lot about you. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. They remind us of what we've been through, what we're still carrying, and what we're capable of overcoming. Sophia's strength wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her peace, her life. That's the real victory. And it echoes something the Stoics always believed. You may not control what happens to you, but you can always control how you respond. Marcus Aurelius said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's exactly what happened here. The very thing meant to break her became the fire that rebuilt her. So maybe you're going through something heavy right now. Maybe people counted you out. But if Sophia's story teaches us anything, it's this. You're not finished. You can rise. If this story spoke to you, my friend, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who might need it, and subscribe so we can keep walking through these powerful stories together. You're not alone.